Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Geopolitical Pico. My name is Juan Francisco, and I'm joined as always with my friend Ronan Wordsworth. How are you doing, man?
Not too bad, Juanfrey, not too bad. How are you doing?
Well,
getting by.
I'm getting by, and we have a really sensitive topic today. So I think we'd rather dive into it.
We'll say a doozy of a topic.
Doozy of a topic. It's clearly the topic, definitely top 2 topics of the year. So yeah.
Well, I think, first of all, a lot of people have asked why we haven't said anything on the Israeli-Palestinian situation at the moment, and now we finally are. So we wanted to, first of all, leave it for a little while, because there's 2 major reasons I think we didn't want to touch it to start with. And first of all, I think if we look at the rhetoric around the conflict, it is so hostile and so polarized, and everyone is divided into 2 camps, and there's no room for gray area, which is, let's face it, the real way the world operates. So I think this tension exists, and it becomes very difficult to give good commentary without just being accused of being biased one way or the other. So we're going to aim to give you very neutral commentary based off our perspectives of what's going on and the geopolitical implications. And then the second major reason why we wanted to leave it for a while is because in the immediate aftermath of the October 7 invasion of Hamas into Israel, the Israeli response was large, but we didn't know how it was going to evolve over time, what this level of support would be for Israel and for the IDF from international community. And now, after 2 months have passed, we can see some different trends emerging. We can see different regional forces shifting and changing because of the conflict. And I think so now is a really good time to talk about the geopolitical situation because of the invasion and because of the response, and talk about how it might play out over the next few months, year, etc. So I don't know. First of all, do you want to run
dive through? Let's dive into it.
You can run us through first of all what is the situation. So give us a brief overview of what's happened, where we're at today in mid-December.
So as we know, on October 7th, Hamas launched an attack in Israeli soil, which costed the life of 1,200 Israelis, which triggered a response by the Israeli government with a massive bombardment at a level that the region had not experienced before. And as far as now, with the latest data that comes from the 15th of December, there's been 18,000 deaths within Gaza, according to the Ministry of Health of Gaza. More than 51,000 injured people. Out of the 18,000 casualties, there's been more than 70% of them are either children or women. More than 60% of all the residential buildings in the Gaza Strip are damaged or destroyed. And since the ground operation that Israel launched in northern Gaza started, the IDF has confirmed the death of 119 soldiers, plus more than 600 wounded. So we are talking about numbers that, although it is a long-standing conflict, and this has been in 2021, there was a conflict in 2014, 2009, 2008, 2006. The scale of casualties is unprecedented in the conflict since it started, basically. So clearly, it's in my opinion, it's a turning point in the region because of the scale of, first of all, the Hamas attack, and second, the Israeli reaction. And I think we can talk a little bit. This is the basis. We all know, we are seeing the news every day, although the numbers may divert a little bit. They're actually more or less agreed. This data that we're taking it from the United Nations. So I think we can talk a little bit about. Let's forget about that part. Let's talk about the geopolitical part. Let's talk about what was the development of Israel's support since the beginning, and how has it changed a little bit now.
Yeah. So I want to start way back. Obviously, America is is Israel's number one supporter traditionally, still now. That hasn't changed. However, the rhetoric has changed significantly, even within the United States, with the level of, we've seen both sides. We've seen anti-Semitic issues within the US, but also many anti-Palestinian voices talking out and saying that this is Israel's right to self-defense, which I would debate has been well and truly crossed by this stage. However, that level of support has diminished significantly through the US's allies. So if we see way back at the beginning of the conflict 2 months ago, there was quite a firm line from American allies, such as the Five Eyes, Canada, UK, New Zealand, and Australia, of course, that this was within Israel's right to conduct the operation in self-defense against the hostile threat of Hamas. But due to the scale of the response of the IDF and the level of indiscriminate bombing, even as the US has acknowledged, that support has completely dried up. So we've seen last week at the UN General Assembly vote, the Canadian, Australian and New Zealand delegations issue a joint statement condemning the indiscriminate bombing, calling for a ceasefire. And then over the weekend, Germany, France and the UK foreign ministers all spoke out against the bombing campaign continuing and asking for a pause in the conflict, just due to the level of the indiscriminate campaign and damage done to
the level of civilian casualties in this conflict has been reported to be higher than any other conflict in the last 40 years in the world. And
German, France and UK are all very big, long-term allies of the Israeli government as well. So it's kind of unprecedented. They've begun to feel this isolation, and I guess that was epitomized by the UN General Assembly vote last week, where there was only 10 countries voting in favor of or against the immediate pause to hostilities, including the US and Israel. So that level of support has completely dried up for Israel, whereas I would say for Palestinians, there's much more sympathy. I think everybody agrees that Hamas is a really terrible organization, except if you're talking about Iranians or a few different groups. Like, nobody actually is really supportive of Hamas, and Hamas have been in power in the Gaza Strip since 2006, I believe. So
we can even point out that right before October 7th happened, in a survey conducted by the Arab Barometer, that finished in the 5th of October, actually the legitimacy of Hamas within Gaza was clearly eroded. There was less than 30% of the population that believed that Hamas was doing anything good there. I mean, inflation was rampant. The poverty within the Gaza Strip went from 31% in 2011 to more than 50% nowadays. So not even like the Gaza population was also not that wary of Hamas. Although it is true that ground surveys made now, which have gotta say, given the circumstances, their legitimacy is got to be put in question. But there are some reports that say that now the population may be more in favor of Hamas, although it's something that it's not really testable.
Well, I think here, this is something we'll touch on later a bit, but it actually creates a new wave potentially of Hamas fighters, because they're going to be radicalized due to the Israeli actions. Another point is that Israel's concerns that Hamas uses different civilian population as human shields is very true. We've seen many instances of that in the past. So that's kind of the justification for some of the bombing campaigns, saying that these are hideouts of Hamas. But the problem is now we've seen that develop into covering, I think, over 80% of the territory of the Gaza Strip is considered legitimate target according to the IDF, and have been given evacuation orders. So there's really running out of places to go. And I think the international community has seen this, and I think the line has been crossed. The problem for Israel is like that they can't really step down now. So I don't know.
Clearly, I mean, one of the biggest problems following that, in my opinion, is the rhetoric that the Israeli government has had since this far-right government is in place. I mean, you literally have ministers who are members of terrorist organizations, which are considered terrorist organizations. Ben-Gvir, the Minister of Defense, he was the lawyer of the settlers in the West, the settlers that were doing illegal settlements in the West Bank. So, I mean, obviously, that doesn't give a good image either for Israel's allies.
And I think now we can just go. I mean, talked a lot about Israel. Now we can talk about the regional implications, because there's a lot of
Let's go on geopolitics.
but there's a lot of the neighborhood surrounding Israel, which has become very hostile potentially, and the environment's changed completely since the attack of Hamas. So do you want to run us through some of the
basically, what we've seen are U.S. military bases and assets being attacked in Syria and in Iraq systematically by different groups. We've also seen a ramp up of Hezbollah's activities in southern Lebanon, although still not entering in a full-scale war. There's reports that suggest that Hezbollah may actually be accumulating militants in the border, close to the border.
That was just over the weekend, actually, that Hezbollah were potentially putting troops down to the southern border of Lebanon with Israel in anticipation of a full-scale conflict, and basically that they weren't going to step down. And so I have heard from sources inside Lebanon that the mood is very somber, that they believe that this
is the mood is very somber because the Lebanese government said it before, some months ago. They don't want to enter in a war with Israel, but Hezbollah is too big within Lebanon, and they don't want to risk a civil war within Lebanon, which is a country that is already pretty in a pretty dire economic and social situation. And also, apart from this Hezbollah, which is Iran-backed, we also have the Yemeni Houthis, which have been scaling up their missile attacks against targets of Israel and the U.S. in the Red Sea, and even launching the longest capacity missile ever launched by a non-state actor, covering 1,200 kilometers, which is impressive.
Traveling over Saudi Arabia.
Many states, like developed states, don't have that
capability.
Those capabilities.
But those have clearly come from Iran. So I think that's the thing here. If you look at a lot of the conflicts in the region are being stirred up by Iran, while other Gulf countries may be very outspoken against Israel, they're not necessarily getting involved to the same level as Iran. But Iran's not getting directly involved, but through these proxy forces, being Hezbollah, being the Houthis, and being the different Iraqi and Syrian
different
militias. They're all getting supplies from Iran.
Indeed, for example, we can also say that in the first weeks of the war, Israel launched airstrikes and missile strikes against the airport in Damascus to basically try to inoperate the landing strips, because they suspected that that Hezbollah or Iran-backed militias were receiving weapons, and
then to go back to the Houthis, so they haven't just limited themselves to firing missiles towards Israeli territory, but we've seen over the last month a massive step up in attacks on civilian shipping cargo going through the Gulf and through the Red Sea. And this is extremely important, because if we talk about that exact route through the Red Sea there, which passes the tip of Yemen, so it's kind of quite close to where they're able to strike. 12% of the whole world's shipping goes through that strait.
Mm-hmm.
So this will severely affect world supply lines if they were able to continue. So
let's remember that not that long ago, the Suez Canal was actually blocked because of an incident with a ship in the canal, and it delayed the international trade months and months and months. It also affected the economy of many countries. It created inflation. So it is actually something really important. We have two big corporations such as BP and Costco, which are already saying that they are wearing their concerns about transferring doing their trade through the strait. And that is something definitely to take into account for the rest of the world.
That's new as well. So that's new information that a few companies have started to limit their shipping through the strait there because of the risks associated with it. And in response, we've seen the US Navy step up their presence in the region, with 3 aircraft carrier fleets being deployed at the moment to the Red Sea there. So we'll see how that continues to develop. But in terms of the Houthi rebels in Sana'a, they've said that they're going to continue the attacks for as long as Israel keeps attacking it keeps attacking Gaza. So I don't know how that will develop, but currently we see like a severe escalation within the shipping routes, and the flow and effects of that are going to be felt by everyone, I guess.
Yes, and I would like to point out that they're going to be felt specifically by Egypt. I think it's a country that has not been, well, obviously it's part of the conflict because the only border crossing that is systematically being open to let aid into Gaza is the border of Rafah, which is in the south of the Gaza Strip, in the North Sinai Governorate, the border with the North Sinai Governorate. There's two problems that I think are really critical for Egypt. The first of all, obviously, a high amount of its revenue, of its GDP, depends on the trade that goes through the Suez Canal. If there is a stagnation of the trade, if there is a disruption of the trade, that's going to affect deeply the pockets of the Egyptian government. And also the possibility of high amount of refugees entering the northern Sinai Governorate can also help in destabilizing an already weak country in many senses. It's a country that was hit badly when the Russian invasion to Ukraine happened, because they depended massively on the grain that was exported from the region. They've had inflation. They have several problems, civil problems, security problems already in the state. And although the biggest historical actor and terrorist actor in the Sinai Peninsula, that used to be Al-Qaeda in the Sinai, seems to be not that much active at this point, it clearly the overall amount of adverse circumstances may actually trigger a problem in Egypt, and I mean, I've heard things such as Egypt might collapse. I wouldn't go as far as that, but definitely it would be a problem.
We just had the Egyptian election last week where Sisi won again, but we've seen from international election observers that those votes are really anything but free and fair. I think I didn't see the official figures for this one, but last time he got 99% of the vote, and it was widely expected it would be something similar this time, and he's been reaffirmed as the president. So there is many internal problems with Egypt already before this conflict, and so as you say, it's really problematic for them. And then I think for other Gulf countries, so if we talk like Saudi Arabia, for instance, Qatar.
Super quiet, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, exactly. And I think Saudi's been very quiet. They've provided a lot of aid. I think that's the rich Gulf countries have all been providing a lot of aid, but some have been much more vocal than others. So for instance, Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, has been extremely vocal against Israel. However, most of that just seems to be rhetoric, because following his outspokenness against the Israeli regime and Netanyahu, and calling for a ceasefire and threatening all sorts of things, he signed new trade agreements with Israel, and I think
saying literally the Palestinian cause is our cause. He went out. This is actually pretty fascinating. There was a government organized rally in the airport of Ankara, if I am not wrong. Like hundreds of thousands of people went there, and he said that the Palestinian cause is their cause, although they're still doing deals with Israel.
Because I think that's just part of Erdogan's playbook. We've talked about it a long time ago in an early episode about the geopolitics of Turkey, and I think he's just playing to that. He wants to project himself as a leader of the Islamic world, as a supporter of the Palestinian cause, as the lead supporter potentially, and fighting for them, but actually is much more
the Khalifa,
much more pragmatic, I guess, about
yes. And it's interesting. I mean, obviously we cannot ignore that before October 7th happened, what we were seeing was a trend of normalization of ties between regional enemies in the Middle East. We saw Saudi Arabia and Iran sitting down meddling by China to try and normalize agreements, relations. We saw Syria getting back into the Arab League, accepted by the states that expelled it previously. We've seen reapproachment even with Israel. I mean, we've seen Morocco accepting Israel. Well, we've seen a couple countries recognizing Israel, and we've also seen Saudi Arabia in negotiations with the United States in between to recognize Israel, and not to recognize. I would say that was a little bit too far away. Normalize ties with Israel. That is for sure.
Which would have been a historic change as well, and this was all in the last 6 months leading up to the start of the conflict. Now,
yes, actually. If not because of this, we would have definitely been making an episode on normalization on ties in the Middle East and how can we foresee it in 2024. But obviously, this has made the shift, although it's a little bit unpredictable at this point. How will it continue? And I want to touch a little bit on. We've talked about the West because of being natural allies because of being allies of Israel. We've talked about the Gulf countries and the Middle East and the MENA region with Morocco and so on. But also, there's a part in the international legitimacy, morality of the West that there is an actor that is using for its own. There's several actors, but I think there's an actor that is using it for its own gains. That is Russia. As Russia is using this situation as leverage against the West, with third countries that basically they don't have the same rhetoric of support with Israel, and thus Russia comes to them and says, look, the United States is supporting these people against the Palestinians, blah, 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 and like, we are supporting the Palestinians, although I would argue that Russian support for Palestine is none. Actually, Russia is much closer to Israel historically, but...
However, Russia uses it, especially like the US veto in the UN Security Council, for instance. The US has been vetoing any resolution that calls for Israeli ceasefire or any sort of truce, and Russia then makes this equivalence that is the same as them using their veto for any resolution that's against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I think they're using it that way and kind of legitimizing their own invasion by making the equivalence. Mm-hmm. And then secondarily, the other impact, I mean, this is not directly from Russia, but I think it's really hurting Ukraine. And the reason for that is that we've seen support since the European summer really dry up for Ukraine militarily, especially from the US over the last few months. A lot of the US support has been diverted, the military aid, etc., has been diverted from Ukraine to Israel, especially in the early days of the war. I think that might slow down over the coming months, but that early support was massively towards Israel, and we've seen Ukraine really struggle to get the equipment and to get the ammunition and to get the weapons that they need to continue to defend the country. And I saw a report from the Institute for Study of War last week, for instance, that said if the US continues to not supply Ukraine with what they need over the next few months, that it's highly likely that Russia will be able to make a breakthrough and potentially occupy all of Ukraine, which would invalidate 2 years of support, basically, and kind of makes no sense to abandon the Ukrainian cause at this point, especially when they've been able to withhold so many Russian offensives.
Yes, even the German government said it recently that without the Western support, Ukraine could actually be conquered by Russia, which, as you said, it's from the strategic point of view, it's a loss for the West. I mean, it's a lot of resources, a lot of rhetoric spent on Ukraine. Now, Ukraine has, for the first time, been accepted into the accession part of into the accession process of the European Union, which doesn't mean that Ukraine will enter the European Union in the next year, but it's a step forward for Ukraine to actually be a member state. And obviously, if this U.S. support to Ukraine wavers, also the opposition in the United States is not that pro sending weapons to Ukraine, continue sending weapons to Ukraine. So
and again, they're tying a lot of that support to the Israeli,
yes,
to support for the Israeli government. So I think in many ways, the two conflicts are so different. One is a Russian invasion and a territorial conquest, which is completely outside the international order and the rules-based order. And the other one is a conflict between a much more powerful partner, much more powerful country in Israel against a terrorist organization that hides behind civilian population, and then an indiscriminate bombing of that region. So I think that they're nothing alike, but they're being tied together in many ways, which is kind of unfair to Ukraine and to all the work that they've done in combating the Russian offensive. But that's where we're at the moment. So
it's a little bit of a situation, don't you think? I mean, clearly, this something will have to be written in the future. Something will have to be investigated in the future as to how did October 7th happen, and what are going to be the consequences. Right now, it's really difficult to foresee. What we see is that clearly this conflict is challenging certain changes that were happening in the world for a more peaceful multilateral, call it X. I don't know, because we could have a long conversation about how the world was changing, but clearly this has made an impact.
Now it's changing again.
It's changing again, and it's changing. I would not adventure myself into forecast exactly what will happen, because the rhetoric that we're seeing coming from the Israeli government is one of, we're not going to stop this, regardless of the international support.
It's interesting as well, because the internal dynamics within Israel, I think Netanyahu is basically finished. When the war ends, I don't think he can hang on to power. So he's going to make it his legacy that he is saying that he wants to eradicate Hamas, which is basically an impossibility, because
I mean, his legacy, the way he won the election was by saying that he was the one that was going to provide security to Israel, and spent millions and millions of dollars in creating this electronic border, blah, 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 so it would change. And then during his mandate, Israel has suffered more losses in one single day than any other time in the
exactly. So I mean, in my opinion, he should be finished internally because of the political repercussions.
He already had
so much scandals.
He already had scandals. He was already being prosecuted because of corruption.
And I mean, I think another thing that the conflict has highlighted is two things with the Israeli Defense Force. Firstly, we thought that Mossad and their intelligence service was almost infallible. I heard from many people before the conflict about how they had the best intelligence service in the world, and I always argued that should go to the US by a long way, and that Israel's nowhere near. And we've seen that this massive intelligence failure has led to the attack being able to be conducted. And I mean, even just over the weekend, we saw, I was telling you before, that there was a tunnel exposed from 400 meters from the northern crossing, which was wide enough to drive vehicles through, 4 kilometers long, opening up on the Israeli side. And so this was able to funnel weapons, funnel people through, ready for the attack.
Through the Eret position, which is it's a secure military base of Israel. Like, it went under it.
Exactly. It's completely crazy that they didn't have any information about this until just finding it over the weekend. And I mean, the second major thing we've seen with the IDF is like they're very indiscriminate in the way they act. Over the weekend or just late last week as well, we had 3 Israeli hostages unfortunately be killed by IDF forces. However, what's come out in the aftermath of that was that they were all waving white flags, shirtless, asking for help because they were hostages.
A little bit,
which shows it operandi of the exactly. And I think this is only being investigated because they shot 3 Israeli hostages, but it definitely shows either the level of indiscriminate hatred that the IDF has, or the poor level of training that they can't even they can't have any discipline to engage the rules of law. And we've seen, I wouldn't say, I'm not going to go out and say there has been war crimes committed, but I would say it's very, very likely.
Well,
and
I would say yes.
I would say yes.
With ever, maybe.
No, I'll say yes, of course. But I whether they'll be prosecuted for it or not is another. I'd say, in my opinion, of course, it's been committed, but there'll unlikely be any formal prosecution of it.
There is clearly that can also go up to like what's happening in the West Bank with the illegal settlers. I mean, now the Israeli government, it's like for the first time has put an eye on saying like, no, okay, like this has to stop a little bit, but it's just because the United States has said that they're gonna start revoking passports, visas, for people that are related to this. So like literally the Minister of Defense, as I said before, is related to this, the Ministry of Defense of Israel. And already Ben Gvir, and the level of civilian casualties in the West Bank prior to October 7, as of 2023, was the highest since 2006, which means that the settlements were expanding, people were getting evicted violently from their houses, that there's clear reports that the IDF was assisting settlers to attack Palestinian villages. I mean, clearly there is something that is wrong here, and it's something that has to. It doesn't take the responsibility of Hamas for what they did and the cruelty of the attack, but it is obviously something in order to look at the future solution of the conflict, like a permanent solution of the conflict.
To wrap up, basically, like what's the end game, like from both sides' perspective? Because I think international community wants to have a two-state solution, and I just don't see that as a geopolitical reality that can come to fruition, because the same conditions that existed already prior to the attack and prior to the response still exist, where you've got one country in Palestine which is divided and completely enveloped just about by
two entities. In one side, in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority rules with not that much legitimacy because the people are not that happy.
In the Gaza, Hamas, terrorist, recognized terrorist organization.
Then they sometimes enter into civil wars. Then sometimes are fine.
And for Israel, that threat is going to remain as well from the radical groups within Palestine that they could be attacked. So they have some sort of legitimate fear of that, because we've seen it happen time and again, and then with this terrible October 7th attack. So that level of fear is somewhat legitimate, but that's not going to change come a peace settlement. And as I said briefly before, like they will have radicalized a whole new generation. I think it was the ex-UK Defense Secretary said over the weekend that Israel's going to be dealing for 50 years with the repercussions of their actions because of the new groups of terrorist actors that they will have created within the Palestinian territory. So I don't understand how you could go to have a two-state solution in the way that it's drawn up in the 1967 agreement. I mean, geopolitically, to me, that never made any sense anyway.
The Oslo Accords at this point.
Exactly. Like to have those two states exist in the way that they do, with the borders that they are, it cannot work, in my opinion. And that's the sad reality of the situation. So then it says, okay, what is going to come next? I think the international community has been more condemning of Israel's actions recently, especially as we talked about their allies. And if the last one of their major allies, if the US was to fully revoke support, that could definitely come about a shift. But then I feel like the international community, already what we see the Gulf states and the Arab states calling for is a properly implemented two-state solution, which is, as I said, geopolitically, it doesn't really make sense. We've seen other conflicts arise because of this. We see Nagorno-Karabakh earlier this year, where you have a hostile territory enveloping a smaller country. Then it's always going to lead to some sort of level of oppression.
Literally everyone left.
Exactly, everyone, and the only way it was figured was. So I think also in the way that Israel's conducting their operations and the level of, as you said, 60% of all residential buildings in Gaza are either destroyed or damaged, and there's a possibility they're just trying to make it unlivable, so that even after the conflict, then there will be no opportunity for the Palestinians to continue to live there, because the environment is so destroyed that there's no infrastructure existing. So they're trying to forcibly move people out, not by deporting them, but by making their lives just so miserable. Like they give you an evacuation order, then bomb your apartment building. So you've got nothing to come back to now, and you've got no recourse. So I think it's that the unfortunate situation for the Palestinians has always existed. This situation where their country can't work as it was drawn up and envisaged by the UN in its original construction, and in some ways that made this conflict inevitable. I mean, we've seen it bubbling for 50 years. The escalation maybe was unprecedented, but the conflict always has existed.
Yes, it's not. We cannot say that the conflict started.
And any sort of truce or anything like that, even if, as Israel says, they eradicate Hamas, it's a nonsense. It's not going to happen. And so this position, I don't know how you can actually solve it. It's a geopolitical enigma.
This is probably one of the toughest geopolitical challenges that are currently in the world. And although we try to think about solutions and we try to think about how could it improve, I mean, in the end, just like probably as everyone that is listening to the podcast right now, who's still with us here, we've thought about this. We've had many talks about this prior to this situation even. This is obviously one of the iconic conflicts that you learn since the beginning when you started investigating about this. We don't have an answer. The only thing that I can say is that I think there's need to be rethought of the two-state solution. Clearly, as I agree with you, and the claims of the Palestinian population has to be addressed. The security of the Israelis has to be addressed, but both of them have to be addressed. Either both of them are addressed, or this is a never-ending conflict. And,
exactly.
We will just keep on repeating. Next year we'll have another podcast saying, okay, this happened again.
And I mean, I would also urge people to not be black and white about this, because it's not black and white. I think both sides have committed terrible acts, one being Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and one being Netanyahu's IDF. And the people that suffer the most are the civilians on both sides of the conflict. And I think often that gets forgotten in the rhetoric that comes out, and you need to be fully supporting Palestinian cause, or you need to be fully supporting Israel, or you're anti-Semitic. And I think both of those absolutes are wrong. You can say, okay, the situation always calls for some level of Israel hostility because of the threat, and the way that they have treated the Palestinian people for a long time is wrong. So I think that's.
And honestly, this is the word that we haven't mentioned in the entire podcast, but I mean, when you have the Secretary General of the United Nations saying that there is an ongoing genocide in the region, it's something that, regardless whether you agree with the UN, see its functionality, see its not, see the problems that it's got, see its inability to surpass a veto power of the countries, when the Secretary General of the UN systematically calls for a ceasefire, it's something that we should really, as a society, we should really take it.
And I also learned a new word today, which was domicide, which they said is not classified as one of the criteria for genocide, but that there's calls now for it to do that because of the exact situation we said before, where it's not even just killing the people, it's bombing their places to live and forcibly moving them through that situation. Exactly. So, as I said, that's not considered genocide at the moment, but there's now calls for that, and I think some of them are legitimate. And the word domicide, unfortunately, came into my vocabulary today. So
it also came into my vocabulary today, interestingly enough. So, yeah. Okay, well, it's been a pretty dense episode. Thank you, Ronan, as always.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Guys, please let us know your thoughts on everything that we try and produce here. And
And as always, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We keep on publishing, although we haven't been that active with the explains. We will come back. We will come back with content. We are ramping
Put some maps
put some maps, do some stuff. So yeah, just if you like our content, show us your support with a like, subscribe to our
share with your friends.
And yeah,
Hashtag TGP.
Hashtag TGP. And we'll see you again in the next episode of the Geopolitical Pico. Bye-bye.
The Geopolitical Pico is created by Ronan Wordsworth and Juan Francisco Muñoz, two geopolitical studies postgrads from Charles University in Prague, Czech Republic. Follow us on Instagram at The Geopolitical Pico or Twitter at The GeoPico for more content, and follow us on every podcast platform.